The DJI Ronin S gimbal is a wicked tool for filmmakers and videographers to get really stable footage as well as some creative shots. In this video, I'm going to go over the key features the Ronin S offers as well as some advantages and disadvantages of this gimbal. Check it out.
3, 2, 1.
What's going on, guys? Thanks for tuning into my channel. Blaze here with Moves Media, and today I wanted to share some key advantages and disadvantages as well as the main features of the DJI Ronin S gimbal. Jumping straight into it, I wanted to first go over the design quality and the build. First off, the DJI Ronin S, it's got a really great feel to it. The grip is nice and sturdy. It feels strong in your hands. It's well built, a lot of metal parts versus plastic. And the overall just feeling when you're handling this gimbal, it feels like they really put some extra effort into creating something high quality, prosumer level or professional level, and not just for the average hobbyist. Compared to some of the other gimbals I've operated in the past, the Ronin S is definitely on the beefier side when it comes to gimbals for mirrorless and DSLR cameras. One of the key things that I look for in a gimbal is how compact it is for traveling and transporting. The DJI Ronin S does come with a stock case, which is pretty simple foam, but nice to have. But for me, whenever I'm carrying camera gear around, especially if I'm hiking or going to faraway places, I like to get my gimbal into my backpack with my cameras and my basic gear kit. The DJI Ronin S comes apart, it comes off its hinge, which a lot of camera gimbals in its class don't actually do. So being able to separate the grip from the actual gimbal is a great feature that I really like about the Ronin S. As far as setting up the Ronin S, you do need to connect to an app through Bluetooth, which allows you to actually activate the motors. You won't be able to use the gimbal until you've connected it to the app, and then you go through a few simple steps to get the gimbal rolling. One very important thing that you have to do with all gimbals is balancing it, and the Ronin S is relatively simple to do. There are a few different axes that you need to balance. You don't necessarily have to be perfectly balanced, but the more balanced you are, the less work the motors will do. So if you're using a heavier rig, you want to put less strain on the motors and rely more on balancing it to make for a better setup. One of the things that I really like DJI included with this gimbal is its own stand. Nice and compact, adds for an extra handle if you want to operate with two hands, but also whenever you're shooting with a gimbal, you want to put it down all the time between shots. Great to have when you're balancing your gimbal, and really just a nice convenience versus having to lock the gimbal to a tripod to set it up or put it down. So having that extra stand included with the gimbal, great feature from DJI. One great thing that DJI did with this gimbal is they moved the gimbal arm a little lower. So if you're operating on a DSLR or mirrorless camera, you can actually see the screen while you're operating and you don't need a separate monitor. This is something that a lot of past gimbals didn't do, but the fact that they made this switch really shows me that they were listening to what creators wanted, and having that ability to look directly at the monitor to get a view of what you're shooting is super beneficial to anyone, any filmmaker or videographer using it. As far as tech specs go, the Ronin S can hold a maximum payload of around 8 pounds, which is actually awesome. Your typical DSLR mirrorless rig is only gonna run you about 4 to 5 pounds, so it's nice to have a little bit of buffer if you wanna add a battery pack or any kind of accessories to your camera. Having that buffer means the motors are well within their range and it's gonna operate nice and smooth and at optimal levels throughout your shoot. So the DJI Ronin S has a number of different shooting modes. The first right off the bat is just your basic upright gimbal shooting mode where you're following subjects, you're panning around, just typical operation of the gimbal. The gimbal actually has 3 different presets that you can also use where you can adjust your settings and then set them in on the different presets, so you can just toggle between them and then have those settings locked in. I definitely found that I had to tweak a few of the settings in the app to get optimal smoothness, especially when it came to panning, as well as your deadpan mode. But once I did that, found that it was operating great in the upright shooting mode. The next shooting mode, which I personally love, is low mode. It's basically when you flip the gimbal upside down and now you're operating in a suitcase mode where you can get nice and low to the ground, get really smooth, cool shots, and adding that closeness to the ground just adds that cinematic level, which I really love. I often even operate the gimbal in low mode, even for upright shots, just because I find that it sometimes operates even better, nice and smooth, and it's easy to operate in that upside down format. The next shooting mode, which is a great feature, is sport mode. This isn't typically something I'll use a lot of, but it's still nice to have. Anything high paced, high action, where you wanna pan and tilt and whip your camera around really quickly, like sports or fast-paced movements. It's a great thing where you can toggle that M button, hold that M button, and follow the action really quickly, and your gimbal is gonna react and move nice and fast as if it's handheld, but still add a degree of smoothness. The next mode that you can use with this gimbal is called flashlight mode, and a really popular thing that a lot of people like to shoot is this wicked 360 continuous orbit. It's super cool looking when you shoot this, but something that you're probably not gonna use a lot of, and if you are using a lot of it, you might wanna tone it down because typically these kind of shots are overkill and only reserved for some super creative moments where it really applies. Nonetheless, I really like that 360 spinning shot. It looks super cool and a nice function to have for really specific use cases. The last mode with this gimbal that you can use is called selfie mode. A triple press of the trigger button and the gimbal is gonna spin around and you can actually have a nice smooth selfie footage. I think the gimbal's a bit heavy to be selfieing with and probably a little overkill. If you're doing a selfie in general, you probably don't need a gimbal, but hey, if you want those nice smooth selfie shots, another option that the Ronin S can handle. There are a number of different add-on options you can also get with this gimbal. One of them is a focus wheel where you can actually have someone manually adjusting the focus, or you can do it yourself while you're operating. The other thing is it comes with a multi-purpose port where you can add things like a monitor if you want to add it onto the gimbal and make this a more robust rig. You are going to get pretty heavy pretty quickly, so if you're doing a lot of these add-ons, you might need a vest to take some of the weight off the operator, because if you're operating for any length of time, it's going to get pretty tiring if you have a lot of accessories on top of the gimbal. Battery life with this gimbal is great. The battery grip itself is rechargeable. The battery lasts for around 12 hours, so it's gonna last for a typical day shoot, no problem. One of the disadvantages though of this battery grip system is that you can't have extra batteries in the event that the battery does die. You're gonna wanna make sure you're fully charged up before a shoot, and if you do wanna have a second battery option, you have to buy a separate grip that you can switch in. So for that reason, I actually wish there was replaceable batteries, but the battery life is pretty good and I haven't run into a problem where I've needed to replace the battery, so I can't complain too much, but I do wish that DJI had an option where you can replace the battery and have extra batteries on hand. As far as using this thing goes, it's pretty simple to operate. If you've never used a gimbal before, there is a bit of a learning curve, and like I said at the beginning, that you do need to get into those settings to tweak them and adjust them to make sure that they're optimal for your shooting style and what you're capturing. Once you do adjust those settings though, it's pretty much turn on, ready to go, and with a bit of practice, just getting used to the pan speeds and the different types of shots you use with a gimbal, your shots are gonna look instantly better, and even if you're a beginner operator, it's definitely gonna create some really great improvements to how you can shoot versus a handheld or another complex type stabilizer. When I took a whole bunch of footage the first time using this gimbal, I was really happy with it. The motors handled all the weight of the camera perfectly. Using different shot types, I didn't notice any issues. It gave me a ton of different options, versatility, and just creative freedom. So really happy with the way the footage looked when operating this gimbal, and everything looks super smooth, which is the most essential part when using a stabilizer. So there's a few things with the Ronin S that I really like, and a couple things that I think they could have improved on. One of the things that I love about this gimbal is that it gives you access to your camera battery. So a real frustration that I had with previous gimbals is that in order to change a camera battery, I had to remove it from the gimbal or off the plate to access the battery port. Now DJI's designed this gimbal where when it's on the plate, on the gimbal, you have access to your camera battery port, and it's super easy on the fly to change those batteries. Great job to DJI for including this feature and making those battery slots accessible. Another great feature with the Ronin S is that they use the same plate that you use on a Manfrotto tripod. So if you're switching between gimbal and tripod, it's super easy to do. You don't have to switch the actual plate itself, and you can just transfer camera from the gimbal onto a Manfrotto Plate tripod and get different shots in a run and gun fashion. So a few things that I don't like about this gimbal, or they could have improved on. The first right off the bat is the battery grip. I like the battery life, that it can last for a long time, but I definitely like having a backup on set if I'm shooting with a gimbal and I don't want to worry about the gimbal running out of batteries. So I like to have replacement batteries. With the Ronin S, you can't replace the batteries. You need to buy a totally separate grip, which is quite expensive. So I really wish that they did design the gimbal with replacement batteries, which they didn't do, and hopefully can improve on for the next version. The other factor, which isn't really a disadvantage, but is just a reality of using the Ronin S, is that it is quite heavy. The gimbal that I used before was a little bit lighter, and when using a light DSLR rig that you're operating for a long time, you don't want your hands to get too tired too quickly. So the Ronin S, because of it's more robust, it has a higher payload, but it is a bit heavier, so your arms really do get tired using this thing. One element that DJI could improve on is just the functionality of the app and fine-tuning the motors. It's definitely not super intuitive. I mean, compared to other systems, it's not too bad, and I was able to figure out in not too long a time, but at the beginning I was a bit confused on which functions did what. I was having trouble figuring out what I was calibrating, the joystick versus the actual tilt and pan with the manual movements. One thing that I would also love to have is an easier way to just throw a camera on there and know where the balance points are, whether that's some kind of marking system or not having to fold the gimbal up when it goes into travel mode would just be way more beneficial. If you're removing the plate without having to remember the actual notches that you set your balance mode to, if there's some way to just automatically throw it on there and it was ready to go, just be a nice feature to have, but not a deal breaker, just a nice feature to have for future iterations. And that's basically it. A really quick overview of the Ronin S, a gimbal that I've really enjoyed using so far and can definitely recommend to other filmmakers and videographers. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you did like this video, smash that like button. Let me know your thoughts of the Ronin S in the video description below, and stay tuned for the next video. Peace.